Hey, it's Joe here at Red's Fly Shop. In the early spring, when the water's still cold and there are not a lot of bugs hatching, I really like to go to a dry dropper setup that's specifically designed for colder water conditions. In the early spring, it could be freezing out here one day and then warm up in the afternoon, and we get 2 hours of really good dry fly fishing, and things happen fast. So one of my preferred setups is a dry dropper system that allows me to be very versatile and react to different conditions. So number one, I like to have a tungsten jig head nymph as my dropper, almost always. And I tie it on a loop knot just like that. And I use 5X fluorocarbon because this needs to be very skinny, allowing it to sink straight under the dry fly. Now, why would I choose this over a conventional strike indicator system? Well, one reason is if the dry fly bite is going to be a very short window for maybe just a little while, I want to constantly be gauging the dry fly activity. This fly I can use as an attractor if there are any stone flies out on the water. And the moment fish start taking my dry fly, I can get rid of my nymph so that my dry fly presentation is better and I'm not snagging any trout or getting them tangled when I go to net them. So I get rid of the nymph as soon as the dry fly fishing starts. The other thing that I can do is a lot of times in the early spring, like March and April, the fish are still holding in big pools or long meandering seams. I can take this fly, and because it's at the end of a 7.5 foot leader, I can hold this drift in meandering currents much better than a strike indicator system. So if I'm drifting my fly through a big pool, I can drift this much more effectively than I can a strike indicator, which is constantly floating ahead of my nymphs. With the tungsten jig head nymph, heavily weighted on 5X, it will drop straight underneath my dry fly, and I know that my dry fly and my nymph are both in the right seam line. If the nymph is too light and I'm using a nymph that doesn't sink fast enough, these two flies at this length of tippet, that's about 30 inches, they will bicker and argue over who's doing the driving and which seam we should be in. If this one's going way faster than this, it's not going to be a very good presentation. That drops right underneath there, and the nymph is now heavy enough to steer the dry fly around where it's supposed to go. One of the next things we can do is I can actually react to a hatch. So if I'm out there and a blue wing olive hatch pops up or a March brown hatch, I could take and I could cut this down and I could put on an emerger right behind this in a matter of moments. I can switch from a setup that I could catch fish in fairly deep water. If the water was 6 feet deep like this right here, my nymph is within a couple of body lengths of the trout, okay? So what I could do is I could go from being able to catch fish in some of the deeper pools to putting an emerger right behind this dry fly, and I'm ready to catch fish during that short hatch window in the afternoon, and I'm very agile. Lastly, another thing that I can do is I can fish this dry dropper up very close to myself, or I could cast it 40 feet across a big wide pool and cover more water with a single drift. I have a hard time doing that with a conventional strike indicator with a large indicator and maybe a 2-fly rig. I can't cover nearly as much water as fast. The cold water dry dropper system makes me very agile. We have a big assortment of different tungsten jig head nymphs, often preferred for Euro style nymphing. They also work great in cold water under a dry fly. Just keep in mind, the further this line, the longer this line gets, the less control you have. When it comes to warmer water, warmer conditions, dry dropper fishing or hopper dropper fishing, the setup's often going to be a little bit different, and it'll often be a little bit different if we're using a dry dropper to imitate emergers over a hatch. I'll do some different videos about those later, but now I'll show you a few moments over the last couple of days of guided fishing where we used this setup with great success. And here we go, both dry droppers working effectively as we talked about. And it looks like, oh, they're both pretty much rainbows. One's kind of a cut bow, and perfectly hooked. Get those guys released. And there's the flies and the depth that we're using for today, cold water conditions. Okay, so here's another one, solid fish that we got right there. And it was caught right on the corner of that boulder. The angler, Andy, Put that fly right on the corner of that boulder, drifted into that seam right there. Boom, fish on. I'm gonna work on getting this guy in the net. So we got another one here. And this one was just out in the open water. Beautiful fish. This one was out in the open water on a longer cast. And you can see a lot of this water is not as deep as it looks. It's only 3 feet deep. Great trout. It's only 3 feet deep. So we can cover nice, mature Yakima Canyon rainbow. And get him released in just a sec. Okay, so he's unhooked. Let him swim. So this whole expanse of water here, and like I said, we're in a boat. It doesn't matter. You could be on this bank right here. All of it is maybe at most 4 feet deep in the deepest bucket. And when you have that dry dropper set up like we explained, you can cover all of this right here. And there is really no reason to be nymphing any deeper than that. Okay, so we've cut the dropper nymphs off. We've got a double on dries. The dry dropper game is a great way to gauge the dry fly fishing, knowing that we're eventually going to go there to just dries, but you test it with the dry dropper, get some on nymphs, gauge the success or the activity on the dry, and then cut the nymph off once you got dry fly action. Let's see these fish. Looks like Tyler's got the big boy. We're netting the big one first. Bring him up. Oh my gosh, that is a heavy trout in the net. Beautiful. Good job. Here, Andy, bring your guy in there. Come on. Come on. Oh, you had to manhandle him. Yeah, one is definitely bigger than the other, isn't it, Tyler?
Oh, yeah.